Well, I want to thank you for being a part of this. I want to thank you for being a part of my healing, a big part, and willing to come and participate in this video. And so what folks need to know now is that we're going to do some Q&A, and you're going to get to see Melissa at work a little bit and kind of what we do and what we go through. I think that's fair, right?
Sure. I mean, one of the things is that there's been a lot of the experience that you've gone through. And we talked about that there could be parts of the therapy process, part of just the healing process, that just to be able to be real and for people to be able to understand what some of the thinking was behind it, and that it's not always as easy as we think it's going to be, or that you walk in the door and you don't know what to expect. And so I'm going to ask him some questions about what that process was like for him, and just to kind of be able to have a real conversation with you to understand what that's like. So I was hoping that you could start and share. And so we're going to do it kind of in that direction, we're not doing a therapy session for you or something like that. But I was hoping that you could just share a little bit. So the day that you were coming in for the appointment, were you expecting to come in and talk about the trauma that you'd experienced?
No.
What did you come in thinking that you were going to talk about?
I was planning on coming in and getting out as quickly as I possibly could.
Right. And why did they tell you that you were there?
Well, I mentioned it in my testimony. I didn't mention the doctor, but there was this medical issue that kind of drove me to see you. And the issue was sleep apnea, and just having the testing done and wearing the mask. And I every time I put the mask on or tried, I was just so adamant, I'm not going to do this, because I was afraid. It was torturous for me, and I already didn't sleep well. And so when I came in that day, it had been after a year of my doctor pushing me, not in a negative way. She's very sweet, but she wanted me to come to your clinic, and not necessarily to see you, but to come to the clinic to help with some of those issues so I could sleep better and keep living, I guess.
So sleep was the thing that kind of got you to come in the door. And I think that there are times where people may not realize, and that's what I think questions I'm going to ask you, but that they're having some of these other symptoms or things, but there may be another reason that brings them in the door. But you were open enough after a while.
After 12 months.
But open enough to at least see it through and see what was going to happen from there. And so there may be other circumstances where someone may end up walking through the door, and maybe somebody may mention and say that, let's talk about other things that have happened in your life. And so being open to those, or seeing that, because I know for you said that you had previously thought about getting help and you thought that you were past it and that you were in a different place. And so that kind of allowing yourself to be open.
Right. Well, about 10 years earlier, I did go see a pastoral counselor, and and I thought I was fixed. I determined I was fixed, and so I walked away, and I told him I was done. And so when I came to see you, I kept telling myself, I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. And
the cat being the trauma.
Yeah. And you laid these sheets on me, and the check off list, this happens or this doesn't happen, and you rate them. And the one that still makes me laugh is the one on worry, and I refuse to answer anything on that page. And I actually wrote, I don't worry, I just plan. And which was really not too bright on my part because that was an instant red flag.
Yes.
And so, no, I had all intentions of getting in and getting out as quickly as possible because I didn't want, I already had the nightmares, the fear. When you talk about going into a restaurant, I used to tell my family they just thought that I was being quirky, but I have to see the door. I cleaned the silverware, and it was just supposed to be idiosyncrasies, you know. But walking down the street, if someone was too close behind me, I would stop and let them pass, or I'd cross over to the other side because I would think somebody was following me, and it brought all these feelings back up and lots of things. And so I didn't want to talk about them because I was fixed.
So you walk into the room and we start to have the conversation about sleep. We get to the conversation where past and history comes up and we're talking about trauma. And obviously it's uncomfortable. And obviously you want to get out that door and it's the last thing you wanted to talk about. What made you decide that you were going to come back for that second appointment? What made you decide that, okay, what convinced you that although you were there for sleep, the trauma came up, and I was very explicit that we would be doing trauma work if you came back. Right. What made you make that decision? Because I think there's a lot of people that they go in and maybe they go in for something else and somebody brings up trauma, or they're having that experience of, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. What made you decide, and what advice would you give?
Well, I kind of mentioned it when I introduced you, part of it. I did not expect to find a Christian therapist at MUSC. I was biased. And so I don't know if you remember or not, but I had a whole list of questions about your worldview and the models that you work from, your philosophy and all kinds of things. And
not to stop you, but you didn't do that initially when we were just talking about sleep. It wasn't until the trauma stuff came up, I think, right?
That's right.
So once it was going to get into the hitting home, then it was all those.
Right. And so I was trying to mark you off the list. Mm-hmm. And so you kept giving me all these evangelical answers, and forgive me, I'm thinking, oh crap, what do I do now? And I had met my match, because a lot of times I've been able, just over the years, to talk people down. I've been able to do things where people were intimidated of me, and I was intimidated of you. And when you answered those things, I had kind of a peace about it, and I knew I had been caught. and I was just tired. I told you, I was tired. I was tired of all the things in my head, the images. I was tired of just living in fear. And I didn't want to call it fear. I didn't want to call it worry. I called it many other things. But I had decided that I'll give this a chance because I really had met my match.
Well, and I don't know if you've shared, but just the circumstances of getting you there that day, that you were not slotted to walk through my office door.
No, I didn't talk about the providence of God there, but...
Which was going to be one of my next questions, because you were supposed to walk through the door for one of our well-qualified, but one of the trainees in the clinic, and through lots of scheduling conflicts and concerns and different things, ended up last minute. I wasn't even supposed to be seeing anyone that day, and so we last minute shifted it. So I hadn't any background. You walked in the door, and we were learning it as we went. And so I think for you to talk a little bit about, that kind of divine intervention of pieces in there, if you think that that was part of it, and just what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it was, to me, I really don't believe in accidents in that sense, and that was providential. Because with every answer that I was looking for a way of escape, I mean, you gave me, as I said earlier, the evangelical Christian answer, and I thought, this is not that it's a no-brainer, it's just that there's no escape. This is what I'm supposed to do, and that God really had intervened, because truthfully, I knew things needed to change, that I needed to work on things because, and I tell people this, and you've heard it many times, that I looked at death as my friend. I would pray for death, and God would not grant it, and so yeah, it is Him intervening through you, and I know now that this is what I was supposed to do.
Can you speak more of that when you say this is what you're supposed to do?
Here comes the psychologist out. What I'm supposed to do. Here's where the obstinate Rod comes in. What do you mean by that?
Using your words, you said that you know now that that was what you were supposed to do. And supposed to do in terms of filming this so that other people can hear the story and have strength, filming this for it to be a testimony that God can heal, that pain can count for something. So is it the process? Is it the story? Is it all of it? If you can share some of that as honestly as possible.
It's not just one thing. It is a process, but it is God within the process. And I'm better today than I ever have been. And there have been many things in my life that I've been able to keep people at bay, put on the facade, and oftentimes I think those around me would think, well, he seems to be a pretty happy guy, but on the inside I was dying. And I've learned to be more honest with myself, and with others, and that has been a struggle for some. And so the process, it's not just coming into your office and talking. It's not just talk therapy, but it's also, it has a spiritual component for me. And so all of those things together, even learning some techniques to put into practice that help me through difficult times, things that I would often tell other people that I wouldn't practice for myself. Lots of things like that.
Practicing what you preach.
Practicing what I preach, that's right.
So what would you say was the most difficult part of the therapy process?
Wow, there's so many difficult things. Well, I'll just tell this. I was sitting at this desk, and you had given me homework. Is this what you're thinking too, maybe? To write my impact statement, and put as much detail into it as to what happened over those early years of my life. And the more I wrote, I got to the point of Mr. Lee and what he did to me, and I was furious. I I didn't hate you that night, but I was really ticked at you.
I haven't been your favorite person every time.
Not every time, no. But there was a tsunami of feelings or thoughts that I was so uncomfortable with, because there's only a couple of feelings I'm really good with. And I thought I was going to die. And that was early on. And writing out every detail was just crushing.
So now on the other side of it, was it worth going through that process?
Oh, absolutely. I can talk about those. I don't like talking about them. They still bother me. I still have triggers. I still have thoughts. I want things to go away. I would like to get up one day and say I'd never have any of these thoughts or feelings ever again. But that's not the reality. The reality is I still have them, but I'm able to cope with them. I'm able to be more effective in my daily life. I am more honest with my family. Not that I was blatantly telling them lies, but I just wouldn't tell them, and I wouldn't tell anyone. And so there is that in that sharing, there is a catharsis. It does help. And so I am better with those things.
How has faith played a role for you through the treatment process?
Faith is very important to me. I like things that are symmetrical. I like things that measure out equally. I like going from A to B to C, and that's not always how things are, and that's also challenged my faith some. And so faith plays a big part because it has forced me to have some conversations with God that I didn't want to have.
And are you better on the other side of it?
Yes.
Would you say more about that, please?
I think God and I have a better relationship simply because I'm not hiding as many things. I can convince myself, like most people, if we want to believe something, we can convince ourselves of things that they do or don't exist. And what I mean is I could convince myself that I didn't have a problem and that I didn't worry and all those other things, but the reality is I did. And from a faith standpoint, I've had to revisit some things, and I like, when I say I like things balanced and symmetrical and all those wonderful things, I want to make sure that everything lines up with what I believe about God, about the scriptures. And I want to make sure that there's a reason.
So how have you been able to have kind of reconcile that with your faith through the treatment process? Because I think, as we said, there's a lot of people that think that the two have to be separate. And so how have you been able to find ways to work that through to help other people to see that that can be a part of the treatment, that the two don't have to be separate?
I, I don't think I don't think that they work as well separately. I think they have to be connected. The therapy and the spiritual aspects of my life, they really go hand in hand. I didn't find, and I still don't find, our work together to be lacking in spirituality or in truth. And that's a big thing for me. Truth is a big thing.
Although there were some times when you weren't exactly happy that the spiritual piece would justify doing some things that maybe you are challenging some ways of thinking.
I have been challenged in my thinking many times through this process. But that's a good thing. I think I really do believe being challenged is a good thing because it forces us to think deeper and it encourages us to grow.
So at this point, being pretty much on the other side of the therapy process, I'd like you to speak to the progress that you've seen, the changes that you've seen. How do you know that you are in a good headspace, in a good place? How do you know that it has been beneficial for you? Why is it worth it?
Well, I'm doing this. I would have never have thought about doing this kind of project to put before people before, because what I did tell, I wanted to control every aspect of it, and I like control. I just don't always have it, and so that's one of the realities that or one of the conclusions that I've come to, and I don't have to have control over everything. Even when I thought it made me feel comfortable, it really didn't. And so I think there are many things that have improved in my life. And one is coming to those kind of realities where, well, here's one of the realities, and that is, I can't change the past, but I can certainly have input into the future and how I live it and the impact that my life can make for others. And that was one of the big things that in telling this story when we've talked recently, I want to know that my pain and my suffering means something. That it's not just that it's not just something that happened for no reason, but there is a reason that we can find that brings glory to God and also helps others and brings others out of the shadows that I lived in for so long. The shadows and the darkness in my own mind, and that I don't have to be embarrassed about it. I mean, there are days I still feel embarrassed and shameful, but it doesn't make sense to be shameful for what someone else did to me.
What? Come a long way to make that statement. How does that feel?
somewhat freeing.
Only somewhat.
I can't give you too much here. Yes, it is freeing.
Say that again.
Yes, it is freeing.
So what would you want to tell other people if there's someone that has been through a similar experience or been through some other type of pain and they're really struggling and saying, yeah, but it's different for me, or it was my fault, or I'm too far gone, I can't get help now. What advice would you want to give them?
Well, one I would say, because it took me quite a while to say it wasn't my fault, and it's not your fault. It's a strange thing wanting to take the blame for such a thing. It doesn't mean that you're weak. The trauma attacks you in so many ways, and the thinking, the sometimes irrational thinking, skewed thinking takes over. But when you were asking that question, the first thing that popped into my mind is it's not my fault.
What's it like to say that? Don't fight it.
It feels good.
What are you thinking?
I think we're coming to the end.
Almost. Not yet, but almost.
I'm thinking, keep it together, Rod. Keep it together, Rod.
It's okay to show emotion.
I know, but it's not easy to.
No. And I think that's a big part of what we've talked about, right? Is that there are some things that aren't easy but are still helpful. You know, I wanted to add that the process of getting angry or feeling sad and feeling okay to have those emotions. You know, something that we spent a lot of time talking about as well.
Yeah, the anger I could deal with, I think. Mm-hmm. That was comfortable for me. And if I'm being honest, it still is comfortable. Mm-hmm. That is typically where I want to go first. Mm-hmm. Because all the other feelings confuse me. And I'm still learning.
Mm-hmm. But it's okay to learn.
Sure.
And to speak to that, because you commented at the beginning about I'm going to go into therapy and the fact of kind of wrapping your head around that this is a part of the story, but not the full story. What does that mean for you now? So at first you had hoped that you would go to therapy and that it would just go away. And you would never think of it again, or it wouldn't pop into your mind, and having to wrap your head around that part, that it's part of the story. It doesn't have to be the whole story, but it's still something that is part of your life. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about how that doesn't have to be the thing that defines you, or that as soon as someone sees you, the first thing they're going to see doesn't have to be that this thing happened to you. If you could speak to that.
Right. Well, I think some of those thoughts that I had, and again, I would still love to say it, that I'd get up tomorrow and they'd all be gone. But they're not. And I kind of know where some of the triggers lie, and I can kind of see them coming now. But they don't ruin my day necessarily, or my week. They don't have that control over me. And I think as not defining me, those things don't define me. Really, my identity, and this is the Christian in me, my identity is in Christ and what He says that I am. And I am His child. And all these other things can't even begin to compare to that.
So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was how it was like for you reconciling being a pastor to church and stewards of other people's faith while you were also going through that process and that exploration for yourself. And what was that like?
Many days it was extremely difficult. It's been difficult for a long time, simply because when I think of pastors and what the expectations that others may have, it's almost as if we can't have these kind of issues, these problems. If we have to go seek help, then what do people do when they come to us, right? And can they trust what we say? And so in that sense, it's been difficult. It's also difficult because not only the challenges that I've had emotionally and spiritually, as I would kind of do this accordion thing with God, I'd get close and I'd pull away and I'd get close. I always knew that I had to come back on a weekly basis because people were depending on me. And so it has been some days and some weeks very trying. But a lot of that was pressure that I put upon myself, and I think pastors do that all the time. I don't think I'm alone in that. I thought I was. But the more I read and talk to some others, I am not alone. We do that. And that's part of the reason that I wanted to do this too, is to help other pastors and to help congregations to really surround their pastors and understand that they carry some burdens, and sometimes they carry secrets like I did that no one really knows.
Mm-hmm. And I know when you were in the process starting to share, there was a lot of that kind of anticipatory anxiety or that worry about how people are going to look at you or judge you. And if you could talk a little about kind of what that process was like, and I think you were pleasantly surprised at a number of occasions. Because I think there's a lot of people that have gone through things, and even before they're ready to go in and work with someone or do it, even just telling a family member or a friend can be a really scary thing to them.
Well, some of it is, obviously, I have a few trust issues. and, and so I always found that it seemed like it was easier for people to trust me than for me to trust other people. And part of that also is carrying this this banner of pastor, that if I start to share these things, then all of those things in which you said about the judging and condemning and how people are going to look at me, that's what I was doing to myself. And I think that that's worse than what other people do sometimes, because I expected the worst.
But what did you get? How did people respond when you started sharing?
They were very supportive, very compassionate, loving, understanding. I really don't do well with attaboys kind of thing, and I'm proud of you kind of deal, but because it's not what I was accustomed to. But I got a lot of those,
So
and it was very helpful.
I was going to say, what was it like when you had people kind of validating how you felt or telling you that they thought that you were strong, other than it being a little uncomfortable? What did that do for you? How did that help?
Well, I would like to say that it made it easier the next time, but it is a little easier now after sharing the story numerous times, and and so it kind of it tamped down, if you will, some of my own thoughts and feelings, and what I thought would happen was simply in my own thinking, and it wasn't based in reality. It was exactly the opposite.
So let's talk about Miss Luna here for a second. I know for the first number of years you didn't have her, and then for lots of reasons, I had a conversation about that it may be a good idea. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about her and how she's helped, but also about the process with and without a service animal as well.
Well, one, I didn't think anyone or any dog could take the place of the dog, the German Shepherd King that I had as a kid, and I didn't want to try to replace him. And so as things happened and we talked, and you encouraged me to at least consider it, I have found that she has kind of helped me come out even more, because I'd go to a store and I would try to blend in, get in and get out as quickly as possible, and I don't want to talk to anybody. And I can put the pastor hat on and talk to people at the door as they leave on Sunday or on a Wednesday, or when I'm doing, my ministry, at the ministry aspect of me. But I didn't want to. I don't trust people. So, and she has.
You didn't trust people.
I didn't trust.
Is that getting better?
I'm learning to trust people, but she forces me, one, to get out of the office. She forces me to interact with other people, because she is kind of gorgeous, right? She's a pretty dog, and she's well behaved, well mannered most of the time. She has encouraged me to interact with more people, to talk to more people, and she brings me a sense of comfort. I know she loves me. I can identify with that love. I can't always identify with some feelings, but I can identify that she loves me.
Mm-hmm. And I know we talked about that there was also an important part for you to go through your treatment before having her, to be able to go out in public by yourself, or to be able to do those things. And so she's helped to kind of be in that last step to bring it out even more. But not everybody will be able to have a service animal, or there's different stages. And so I don't know if you wanted to talk about kind of also having to do some of the heavy lifting and those things.
Sure. Well, a lot of times I like to be alone, and which is not healthy, not to the degree that I like to be alone. But there were other things that you encouraged me to do, to talk to people, to begin sharing the story, on some of the trips that I took, meeting new people, those type of things, and learning just to trust a little bit. You don't have to tell the whole story. You don't have to go into detail. And so just taking little baby steps along the way. And so that process started long before Luna came. Luna is a recent addition. I'm sure that you've had many other people come through your door, and they're not all believers, Christians, but you're certainly open to looking at the spiritual aspect. I guess you take people where they are, and how do you deal with others who aren't so sure about they're going to line up with your kind of thinking and worldview and those type of things?
So I think in general, um, as a clinical psychologist, as a therapist, you meet the person walking through the door where they're at. So it is truly, and for some people, they do have faith, they do believe, but it's not something that they are as overt with or about. You see some people that, as they go through the process, there's been a lot of hurting, and a lot of that kind of, maybe they did believe at one point and they have, this anger or putting it towards, trying to find a place to put it. I think that the most important thing you can do is to, and it may seem cliche, but that you treat people with love and you treat people with respect and you meet them where they're at, and you also model that behavior for them by how you act. They will know us by our love type of thing. I think that it's obviously an important part of my life, and it's something that I always am open to wanting to share if somebody has questions about it or is open to it. But I also have to be very careful about that. My job in that role is not the evangelical piece. It's there to provide support and help and treatment, and to use those skills that I was trained to do. And I think that, in my personal opinion, God can use us as a blessing and can use us to help people in a lot of different ways, even if we're not overtly stating what's behind it. So I think I go into every session and I pray to be able to be a blessing to the person that's in there. I ask God to use, to speak through me and to have His Spirit speak through me, and just to be able to meet every person that walks through my door where they're at and help them at the place of what they need. And sometimes it's saying more and sometimes it's saying less. Even in our interactions, there were days where it wasn't the right time to bring something up. And then it was the other day where it says, let's talk about that piece of scripture. Let's talk about that piece. So I think that it's, you just kind of have to be willing to be open and meet people where they're at, and just kind of go into every single interaction as wanting to be a blessing and to treat people with respect and love, and hoping that, trusting that God has the bigger picture and He has the plan. Maybe there's something that you said or did, or they might see something on my wall or a phrase that may not be that moment or that day, but that's something that they hold on to that comes through at a different point. I think that's one of the amazing things, is that God has a way of turning every bit of pain into, a blessing and for His glory. We just may not always know how we're being used or how something that we're saying can touch a life or have an effect, but it's kind of having to just trust Him that He's going to use you in that way.
And that was kind of my point. You were open to my faith when I walked in that day, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm very proud of you. You've worked really hard, and I know that you feel that there's all these things to work through, but I think that your strength is going to be a blessing to so many people, and your honesty and transparency, even when it's difficult, will give people the strength and the ability to do the same and to get help. And you may end up changing and saving so many lives that people don't realize. And I think something that we've talked about, we may not talk much about on here, but it's not just the individual, it's the entire family, it's the extended family. There's so many lives that are touched, and when you're helping one person, it can have that cascading effect. So I think that it's really a blessing to other people that you're allowing your pain to give God glory for that and to help change other people's lives as well.
Thank you.